Good day and welcome to SCO BRICS Insight, where we talk about the latest news, information and analysis of what's really going on in Russia and the BRICS. Now, my name is Rod Mackenzie, and today I want to talk about another European country has started the process of ditching its neutrality. This time it's Austria. Now, the Austrian Foreign Minister, Beate meinl-reisinger, has announced that the country is ready to begin discussions on joining NATO. Now, analysts have noted that there should be sufficient political will in Vienna among the politicians, then that could easily be implemented. However, the change from neutrality to NATO membership may not actually be approved by the majority of the ordinary population of the Republic. So it appears that Austria is prepared to engage in dialogue regarding the potential accession of Austria to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, according to Beate meinl-reisinger, who's the Republic's Foreign Affairs Minister. This decision, she said, is linked to the growing threats to the country's security, as well as an increasingly aggressive Russia. Now, she also stated that the policy of neutrality is no longer a viable option for the state. Now, she didn't actually say exactly how Russia was a threat to the country's security or what it had done with it was threatening towards Austria. Now, at the same time, the minister clarified that neither members of the Austrian parliament nor the majority of the population currently support joining NATO. However, she emphasised the importance of initiating a public discussion on the issue, and that was reported in the newspaper Welt. Now, according to her assessment, such a discussion could be fruitful in terms of achieving their desired outcome. Now, 25 years ago, I worked for 6 months in Vienna building an online brokerage for Bank Austria. And I discovered that the Austrians were masters of subterfuge. I mean, after all, they managed to convince the majority of the world that Adolf Hitler was a German and not an Austrian. Plus, they pretend themselves as not as instigators of World War II, but as actually the victims. Now, it's also worth recalling that it's 87 years since Anschluss in 1938, when the Austrian state unified Nazi Germany with Nazi Germany under the Austrian corporal turned German Führer Adolf Schicklbrügger, who was also better known as Adolf Hitler. And it's 80 years since they were defeated by the Red Army after they invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 in Operation Barbarossa, which was the largest land army ever assembled. So obviously, like the Germans, the Austrians have forgotten their sins of the past and are destined to try and repeat them. Now, before I continue, I would like to make an appeal. If you enjoy my videos, you can help me fund the channel and contribute to its further development. Now, you can do this in two ways. First, you can make a small donation, which can be done by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom of the video screen, or alternatively, clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below the credits. Both are equally easy to do. Now, everybody who donates does get a personal thank you from me, and I'm thanking you all now. Now, I think Austria, like Finland, will suffer if it does join the Russian curse. After all, Austria was a partner in Russian gas, with OMV, the local gas company, being partners with Gazprom. And between them, they have the largest gas storage facility in Europe, that Baumgarten, which sits at the end of the Russian overland gas transit system, and the Opal pipeline, which is the land-based pipeline feed from the Nord Streams. Now, my aim is not to make a triumphant entry into NATO, explained the foreign minister, adding that things had changed radically in recent years. Now, she also dismissed the view that Austria is not going to touch anyone, that no one will touch Austria in return, as very naive, although she doesn't explain that remark in any detail. Now, she also emphasised that Vienna is ready to make a significant contribution to the development of European security. I thought being neutral did that. Now, at the same time, the country's military has a long-standing involvement in EU peacekeeping missions. She said, in this regard, our neutrality has changed significantly since we joined the European Union. Now, it's important to note that Vienna's decision not to engage in military blocs was formally established by its constitution back in 1955. That was actually a year before the Federal Republic of Germany joined NATO. Nevertheless, the issue of abolishing this provision has been repeatedly raised since the beginning of the special military operation by Russia in the Ukraine. Now, the country's parliament's website states that neutrality is not part of the fundamental principles of the country's main document. Now, accordingly, Austria reserves the right to abandon that agreement if necessary. Now, in order to reach a decision on this, it's necessary for 2/3 of the relevant votes to be cast in both the national and federal councils of the state. It's also said that a referendum on the subject to ask their opinion is not currently planned. Now, that is probably because the politicians know they would lose, and the majority of the population certainly do not want to join NATO. But such is this so-called state of democracy in Europe that their views will obviously be ignored. Now, let us remember that after the start of the special military operation, 2 other countries joined NATO. Finland joined the alliance in 2023 and Sweden a year later. Both countries, like Austria, had maintained their neutrality throughout the Cold War, and after the recession, Russia's border with NATO, Finland that is, and Sweden, NATO's ally border with Russia increased from 1,215 to 2,600 kilometres. Now, the Austrian government's application for NATO membership indicates a shift in its long-standing neutrality following the examples of Finland and Sweden. But Berlin, London and Paris are increasingly forging a new military alliance against the so-called Imperial Russia, said German political scientist Alexander Ra. He says their objective is to extend their union to as many countries as possible. However, the decision to abandon neutrality may not be met with widespread enthusiasm in Austria, as the country's population will be required to invest significant amounts of money in costly and uncertain NATO initiatives. Plus, of course, its sovereignty will be transferred to Washington and Brussels. But times are changing. I mean, the liberal elites in the West are pursuing a strategy of militarising the old world. The prospect of a nuclear war has become a thing of the past for Europeans, and they're not even afraid of it. Now, the analyst emphasised that Austria has no longer a frontline state as it was before the NATO expansion. It also added that the idea of strengthening one's own economy by increasing military spending has become a very popular thing to do in Europe. Now, following Germany's complete withdrawal into the anti-Russian camp, some people actually still hoped that Austria would be a conduit for future dialogue between Moscow and Brussels. However, it seems Vienna, influenced by the current military rhetoric, has seemingly decided to align with Berlin. In general, the Austrian Chancellor Christian Stocker still believes that the country will remain neutral. However, criticism from the Germans, the Poles and the British and the French about Vienna's inconsistent position towards Moscow is growing. So the key question is how NATO will continue to exert its pressure on the state of Austria, Ra talks about. Now, as Artem Sokolov, who's a research fellow at the Centre for European Studies of International Studies at the Russian Higher School of Economics, points out, the policy of neutrality has played a significant role in enabling Austria to actually achieve a level of economic prosperity compared with some of its neighbours. I mean, during the Cold War, this allowed Vienna to trade with both the Western and Eastern Bloc countries. Now, the Austrian authorities desire to join NATO as a consequence of their current position regarding the conflict in the Ukraine. Now, they've been a long-standing participant in the anti-Russian sanctions, which suggest a strategic shift from their traditional neutral stance. Now, if this stance begins to crumble, it's logical for them to continue down the path of NATO membership. Moreover, as a member of the European Union, Vienna's strategic position and influence is fully enhanced by being anti-Russian and their standing as a good European. Consequently, the country's diplomatic approach has consistently been aligned by the hardline stance adopted by Brussels. So therefore, the initiation of discussions regarding NATO membership doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. However, implementing this step is actually relatively straightforward. If the Austrian leadership demonstrates the necessary political will, its accession to NATO will effectively be a done deal. I mean, I don't see anybody within the NATO alliance vetoing them in the way that they would the Ukraine. I mean, they state by the European standards as a full combat-ready army at its disposal with a decently level equipment. I mean, for a country of such a compact size with no external threats, it's actually got a decent army. Now, consequently, the alliance will not have to allocate significant financial resources to the modernisation of the Austrian army. Now, the process of retraining the local officer corps into the NATO battle order should be relatively straightforward, and the analysts emphasise that joining the alliance would actually be much easier than it was for Finland or Sweden. However, in the case of Helsinki and Stockholm, joining NATO was largely an emotional reaction to the Russian special military operation in the Ukraine. And Austrian society has played a significant role in helping the country circumvent these issues. I mean, the local population does not support the idea of losing its neutrality, and its citizens do not feel particularly threatened by Russia. Now, there are questions of whether this point of view can be challenged as a significant. Moscow will interpret Austria's accession to NATO as a further development in the organisation's eastward expansion and consolidation. Now, this approach is not aligned with the objectives of dialogue with the alliance, according to Russian sources. He said the level of escalation is set to rise considerably, according to Sokolov. So it seems the Nazi descendants are on the rise again, and it looks like they're looking to emulate their ancestors and be defeated again. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Also set the alerts button so you get informed when my new videos come up. And if you enjoy the videos, you can either donate with the thanks button or buy me a coffee. And I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.